If this sounds like you, stay with me for a moment. Before I begin, can I ask, how old are you? And where are you listening from today? And if you've ever felt dismissed in a room full of people who were supposed to love you, you might want to subscribe. I don't say that lightly. This story unfolds slowly, and it's meant for someone who's been swallowing things they shouldn't have had to swallow. I didn't expect the day to hurt. That's the strange part. I woke up that morning calm, even hopeful. I'd picked out a simple outfit the night before. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. I wasn't trying to make the day about me. I just wanted to show up, smile, and leave quietly if that's what the moment required. The celebration was for her, my daughter-in-law. A birthday, technically, but really, it was more than that. It was her moment. The house was full, the kind of full that smells like sugar and coffee and too many candles burning at once. Music played softly in the background. People laughed in clusters, glasses clinked. Phones came out for photos that would later be filtered and captioned with words like family and blessed. I arrived early, because I always do. It's a habit I never shook. I brought a cake, not extravagant, but thoughtful. The kind she liked. I'd remembered, even though she rarely remembered anything about me. I told myself that was okay. For years, I'd learned how to make peace with being peripheral. I told myself it was maturity, that this is what happens as families grow and change, that not every role is meant to stay central. Still, as I stood there holding the cake, watching people move around me without really seeing me, something tugged at my chest. A familiar feeling, the one I usually ignored. She saw me eventually. Her smile tightened just slightly. The way people smile when they don't want to create a scene but don't want you there either. "Oh," she said. "You came." I nodded. "Of course." She glanced at the cake. We already ordered one. I hadn't known that. No one had mentioned it. I felt a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. "That's okay. This one's just small." She hesitated, then waved a hand dismissively. "Just put it in the kitchen." The kitchen felt like exile. I set the cake down beside another one, bigger, professionally decorated, already positioned like it belonged. Mine looked apologetic next to it. I told myself not to read into it. The afternoon went on. Conversation skimmed past me. People were polite, but distant. I'd learned how to fill space without occupying it, laugh at the right moments, ask questions that kept the focus on others, excuse myself before anyone had to ask. My son was there, but busy, always busy. I caught his eye once across the room, and for a brief second, I thought he might come over. He didn't. Then it was time for the cake. Everyone gathered. Phones raised. Someone dimmed the lights. The big cake was brought out. Candles lit. Applause breaking out like it was rehearsed. I stood toward the back, hands clasped, smiling because that's what you do when you don't want to be noticed. As the singing wound down, she leaned toward someone and whispered. I didn't hear what she said, but I saw the look that followed. A quick glance in my direction. A decision made. She turned toward me then, not smiling. I need you to leave, she said. At first, I thought I'd misheard her. The room was loud. My ears rang slightly. I'm sorry? This isn't the right time, she said, her voice tight. You're making things awkward. Awkward. The word hit harder than I expected. People were watching now, pretending not to, but watching all the same. I felt heat rise in my face. My heart started pounding in a way that made it hard to breathe. I can step into the other room, I offered quietly. She shook her head. No, I mean, now. It's better if you go. My son didn't say anything. Not a word. He stood there, eyes fixed on the cake, like it might offer him instructions. For a moment, I considered arguing, explaining, defending my presence, listing all the reasons I had a right to be there. But something inside me went still. I nodded. I picked up my purse. No one stopped me. No one said my name. The singing resumed awkwardly as I walked past, the sound following me like a bruise. Outside, the air felt cold against my skin. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. My hands shook, not from anger, from disbelief. I replayed the moment again and again, wondered what I'd done wrong. if I'd stood too close, spoken too much, existed incorrectly. And that's when the thought came, slow and unwelcome. This wasn't about the cake. It never had been. That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove without a plan, letting the streets blur together until I ended up in a grocery store parking lot I'd been to 100 times before. The place was nearly empty, the kind of quiet that feels heavy instead of peaceful. I sat there with the engine off, my forehead resting against the steering wheel, and tried to understand what had just happened. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe I'd misunderstood her tone. Maybe it was one of those moments that feels bigger because emotions are already close to the surface. But the truth kept pushing its way back in. She didn't ask me to step aside. She didn't say we'd talk later. She didn't even pretend it was about space or timing. She told me to leave. In front of everyone, and my son let her. When I finally drove home, the house felt too quiet. I set my purse down, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the kitchen staring at the counter where I'd placed the cake earlier that morning. The empty spot felt symbolic in a way I didn't want to think about. I poured a glass of water and took a sip, then another. My hands were still trembling. I kept replaying her words in my head, trying to hear them differently, trying to soften them. I couldn't. That's when I did something I hadn't planned to do, something I'd been avoiding for a long time. I opened my laptop. At first, I told myself I was just checking email, distracting myself. But my fingers didn't hesitate. They went straight to a folder I rarely opened anymore. One I'd created years ago for organization, back when I believed clarity would keep things balanced. Inside were documents, bank statements, transfers, notes I'd written to myself after phone calls that left me uneasy, dates circled, amounts highlighted, small comments in the margins like temporary and just until they're stable. I scrolled slowly. There it was. The pattern I'd been refusing to name. The down payment I'd quietly covered when they said they were just short. The credit card I'd paid off when things got out of hand. The rent I'd sent when a job fell through. The emergency fund I dipped into because family doesn't let family struggle. I hadn't done it all at once. That's how it happens. It's never one big sacrifice. It's dozens of small ones, spread out enough that you don't feel them until you add them up. And when I added them up, my stomach dropped. I realized, sitting there alone in my kitchen, that I hadn't just supported them. I'd financed the life they were living. The vacations, the parties, the comfort, the ease that allowed her to throw someone out mid-cake cut without worrying about consequences. I closed the laptop slowly. A strange calm settled over me. Not relief, not anger, just clarity. Because now, the moment made sense. I hadn't been asked to leave because I was awkward. I'd been asked to leave because I reminded her of something she didn't want to acknowledge, something inconvenient, something that disrupted the image she was carefully presenting to the room. I was evidence. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my son. Let's not make this a big deal. That was it. No apology. No question about whether I was okay. Just a request. Really, a directive. To minimize myself again. I stared at the message for a long time. Another text followed. She was just stressed. You know how she gets. I did know how she got. I'd been accommodating it for years. I typed a response, deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Every version sounded like an explanation, and I was suddenly tired of explaining. Instead, I replied with something simple. I need some time. That didn't go over well. The call started later that day. Missed calls at first, then voicemails. His voice sounded frustrated, confused, defensive. He kept saying he didn't understand why I was taking this so hard. That phrase stayed with me. Taking this so hard. As if the hurt were optional. As if I'd chosen it. Over the next few days, more details surfaced. Not through confrontation, but through carelessness. A comment slipped out about how nice it was not to worry about money lately. A casual mention of plans that assumed continued support. A joke about how family always comes through. Each one landed differently now. I started to see how the story had been rewritten without my consent. In their version, I wasn't a contributor. I was a constant, a given, something reliable enough to fade into the background. And that realization felt like betrayal. Not because of the money. Money can be replaced. Because of the dismissal. Because I'd been reduced to a function instead of a person. I thought back to the look on her face when she told me to leave. The lack of hesitation. The certainty. You don't get that confident unless you believe you're untouchable. Unless you believe the person you're dismissing won't push back. That was the moment something hardened inside me. I didn't want revenge. Not really. I didn't want to embarrass anyone or cause a scene. What I wanted was acknowledgement, honesty, a correction to the narrative that had quietly erased me. And I realized something else too. Sitting alone with that truth. If I didn't say something now, I never would. The emotional collapse didn't arrive all at once. It came in layers, like waves that kept knocking me off balance just when I thought I'd found my footing. At first, I was numb. I went through my days on autopilot, answering emails, making meals, folding laundry that didn't really need folding. I avoided my phone as much as possible, because every vibration made my chest tighten. I knew what was waiting there. More messages asking me to smooth things over, to be reasonable, to understand. Understanding had always been my job. At night, though, the numbness wore off. That's when the questions came. Not the kind you can answer, but the kind that circle endlessly. When did I become so easy to dismiss? How long had this version of me existed in their minds? Had I trained them to see me this way? Or had they simply taken advantage of what I offered? I replayed the cake scene more times than I care to admit. Her voice, the way she didn't lower it, didn't soften it. The fact that no one stepped in, not a single person said my name. That part haunted me the most. I'd always believed that even if one relationship faltered, the others would hold. That surely someone would notice when something crossed a line. But lines only exist when people agree they matter. I started questioning my own memory. That's what prolonged dismissal does. It makes you doubt your internal compass. I wondered if I'd exaggerated the support I'd given. If maybe I'd misunderstood how much it meant. If perhaps I was expecting too much gratitude for what I'd chosen to do. The denial was sneaky. It wore the mask of responsibility. Maybe I shouldn't have gone to the party. Maybe I should have asked first. Maybe I made her uncomfortable. I caught myself defending her in my own head, as if she were sitting across from me. And then, one afternoon, something small snapped. I was at the bank, sitting across from a woman who was explaining account details in a calm, neutral voice. She asked a simple question about recurring transfers, and I heard myself answer automatically, explaining why they were there, how they were temporary, how family situations can be complicated. She looked at me for a moment longer than necessary and said gently, "You know you don't have to justify this to me." I nodded, but my throat tightened, because I'd been justifying my existence to people who should have never asked me to. I walked out of the bank and sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel as the weight of everything finally hit. Not just the party, not just the money, but the years of quiet accommodation. The way I'd learned to disappear, to keep things running smoothly. I cried then, not loudly, not dramatically, just steady tears that didn't seem to stop. Grief poured out of me, not just for how I'd been treated, but for how long I'd accepted it. The consequences started showing up in unexpected places. My son grew distant, then sharp. Our conversations turned transactional. He'd ask how I was, but only after long pauses, like the question was a formality. When I didn't immediately offer reassurance or support, the silence stretched uncomfortably. Once, he said, "You're being different." I almost laughed. Different meant unavailable. Different meant not rushing in to fix what I hadn't broken. Different meant I'd finally stepped out of the role that kept everything comfortable for everyone else. He didn't like that. Neither did she. A message came through one evening from her number. It was short. "I don't know why you're doing this, but it feels cruel." Cruel. That word sat heavy in my chest. I read it over and over, feeling the familiar pull to explain myself, to soften, to apologize for making things difficult. My fingers hovered over the screen, ready to type something that would reestablish peace at my expense. I put the phone down instead. The denial phase lasted longer than I expected. Even after everything, part of me hoped this was a misunderstanding that would resolve itself if I just waited, if I stayed calm, if I didn't escalate. But nothing resolved. The consequences became clearer with time. Invitations stopped. Updates came secondhand, if at all. I was no longer included in plans, only informed when it was convenient. I'd been downgraded quietly, without discussion. And still, I wrestled with guilt. Because no one teaches you how to hold people accountable when you love them. Especially not when you've been the dependable one, the strong one, the one who doesn't need much. I asked myself hard questions in those weeks. Was I punishing them by pulling back? Or was I simply refusing to punish myself anymore? The answer shifted depending on the day. What didn't shift was the truth. Pretending nothing had happened was no longer possible. One evening, as I sat alone with the lights off, I realized something that scared me. If I went back to how things were, if I apologized, minimized, smoothed things over, I wouldn't just be forgiving them. I'd be abandoning myself. That realization didn't bring relief. It brought fear. Because choosing yourself after a lifetime of choosing others feels like stepping into the unknown without a map. And I wasn't sure who I'd be without the role I'd always played. The confrontation didn't happen the way I imagined it would. There was no dramatic buildup, no carefully planned speech. It came out of exhaustion more than courage. She called one evening, her voice tight, controlled. She said we needed to talk, that this distance was getting ridiculous. I noticed how she framed it, like the problem was the space, not what caused it. I almost said I was busy. Old instincts die hard. But something in me was tired of postponing my own discomfort so others could stay comfortable. So I said yes. We met at a quiet cafe, the kind with soft music and neutral walls, designed so no one has to feel too much. She arrived first and didn't stand when she saw me. Just looked up, eyes scanning my face like she was bracing for inconvenience. We exchanged polite words. Weather, traffic, the choreography of avoidance. Then she said, "I don't understand why you're acting like this over a misunderstanding." There it was. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't interrupt. I let her talk. She explained how stressed she'd been, how the party had spiraled, how I'd embarrassed her by leaving without saying goodbye. She said people noticed. She said it made her look bad. Not once did she mention the words she'd used. Not once did she ask how I felt. When she paused, she waited for reassurance, for me to say I understood, for me to absorb it and hand back forgiveness. Instead, I took a breath and said quietly, "You told me to leave," in front of everyone. She waved her hand slightly. "I didn't mean it like that." "But you said it like that," I replied. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. "And no one corrected you. Not you. Not anyone." She frowned, as if I were complicating something simple. "You're taking this too personally." That sentence landed harder than I expected. I looked at her and realized this wasn't about a cake or a party or even respect in a single moment. It was about how easily my feelings could be dismissed once they became inconvenient. "I took it personally," I said, "because it was personal." She leaned back, crossing her arms. Defensive now. "So what, you're punishing us? Cutting us off? Over one comment?" I shook my head. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just not pretending anymore." That's when her tone changed. Sharper. Accusatory. She said I'd always been sensitive. That I liked to play the victim. That everything I'd done for them was my choice. And throwing it back now felt manipulative. Each word felt like a test. Would I crumble? Would I apologize for making her uncomfortable? Part of me wanted to. I felt the pull. The familiar urge to smooth the edges, to say something like, "Maybe you're right. Maybe I overreacted." But I didn't. Instead, I said something that scared me as it left my mouth. If what I give only matters when it's convenient, then I need to stop giving. Silence settled between us, thick and unfamiliar. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said finally. "After everything," I nodded slowly. "After everything is exactly why I am." I left the cafe shaking, not with regret, but with adrenaline. Standing up for yourself doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels terrifying, like you've stepped off a ledge and you're waiting to see if the ground will appear. The days that followed were rough. There were consequences I hadn't fully prepared for. My son didn't call. When he did text, it was curt, practical. He said I was making things harder than they needed to be, that families forgive. I wanted to tell him that forgiveness without accountability